Imagine you're standing alone in the African savanna. It's the middle of the day. The sun is directly above your head. You're sweating. Then, a lion sees you. For a second, neither of you moves. Then the lion starts running. What do? Most people would say, run. Terrible idea. A lion can sprint at nearly 50 miles per hour. You can't. Not even close. So maybe you climb a tree. Also a terrible idea. Lions climb. You grab a stick. Now you're just making the lion's lunch slightly more difficult. If you had to bet on which species would survive, you'd probably choose the lion, or the wolf, or the bear. Honestly, almost anything except the human. Humans don't have claws. We don't have sharp teeth. We're not particularly fast. We're definitely not the strongest. And compared to almost every other large mammal, we look strangely unfinished. Bears have thick fur. Wolves have thick fur. Foxes have thick fur. Even chimpanzees, our closest relatives, are covered in hair. But humans, we're almost naked, which sounds like one of evolution's biggest mistakes. Imagine taking off your winter jacket, throwing it into a fire, then deciding to survive the next ice age. That's basically what evolution did to us. It got rid of our fur. And somehow, that terrible decision changed human history forever. But here's the strange part. Scientists don't actually agree on exactly why we lost it. There isn't one perfect answer. There are several ideas. Some are convincing, some are probably wrong. And one of them completely changed the way humans hunted forever. Let's start with the obvious explanation. Maybe the world simply became hotter. Less fur, less heat. Makes sense. Except, it doesn't explain everything. Because plenty of animals live in hot places. Lions don't shave themselves every summer. Zebras aren't hairless. Elephants still have skin thick enough to survive the sun. So why only humans? The answer might have nothing to do with temperature. It might have everything to do with movement. Imagine chasing a deer. Not for 1 minute, not for 10 minutes, for 3 hours. Sounds impossible. The deer is faster. It changes direction instantly. It knows the land better than you do. So how could a slow, weak human ever catch it? Simple. Don't stop running. That sounds ridiculous. But that's exactly what our ancestors did. Most predators hunt with speed. Humans hunted with patience. A lion explodes with power. It sprints. It attacks. If it fails, it rests. Humans played a completely different game. They walked. Then they ran. Then they walked again. Then they kept running. Hour after hour. Every step pushed the animal a little closer to exhaustion. Until finally, the deer simply couldn't run anymore. Not because it wasn't fast enough. Because it overheated. That's something most people never think about. Running creates heat. Lots of it. The faster you move, the hotter your body becomes. And eventually, heat becomes more dangerous than hunger, or even the predator behind you. Most mammals solve this problem by panting. Dogs do it. Wolves do it. Even lions do it. But panting has one huge weakness. It works best when the animal stops moving. Humans found a completely different solution. We sweat. Not a little. A lot. Millions of tiny sweat glands cover your body. Every drop of sweat carries heat away from your skin. It's like having thousands of tiny air conditioners built into your body, which sounds amazing, until you remember one small problem. Hair. Lots of hair traps heat. Imagine wearing a thick wool sweater in the middle of summer. Now imagine trying to run a marathon wearing it. You'd overheat long before the finish line. For early humans, body hair slowly became less useful, and staying cool became more important than staying warm. Little by little, generation after generation, our ancestors became less hairy. Not overnight, not in 1,000 years, over hundreds of thousands of years. Without realizing it, they were becoming one of the strangest mammals on Earth. And at first, it worked perfectly, until humans finally walked somewhere where staying cool was no longer the biggest problem. Because one day, our ancestors left Africa, and suddenly, being almost naked didn't feel like such a good idea anymore. And that changes everything. Africa had been forgiving. Warm days, warm nights, no freezing winters, no endless snow. But outside Africa, the world played by different rules. Imagine walking north, just a little farther every generation. The air gets cooler, the nights get longer. Winter lasts a little longer each year. At first, it's uncomfortable. Then it becomes dangerous. A hairless human standing in freezing wind loses body heat incredibly fast. Not because we're weak, because we were built for a different world. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, our greatest evolutionary advantage started becoming our greatest weakness. So how did humans solve it? Most people would probably say, clothes. Not yet. Clothes came much later. The first solution was much simpler. Fire. Fire changed everything. It kept predators away, it cooked food, and perhaps most importantly, it let humans survive nights that would have killed them only a few generations earlier. But fire had one major problem. You couldn't carry it everywhere. You couldn't chase a herd of animals while dragging a campfire behind you. And you definitely couldn't sleep safely every single night beside an open flame. Humans needed something portable, something that stayed with them wherever they went. But before we talk about clothing, there's another question we have to answer. If humans were becoming hairless, why didn't evolution simply give us our fur back? After all, that seems much easier than inventing clothes. The answer is surprisingly simple. Evolution doesn't plan ahead. It doesn't think. It doesn't predict the future. It only solves today's problem. Millions of years earlier, today's problem was heat, not cold. Less fur solved that problem. Thousands of years later, humans walked into freezing climates. Now cold became the problem. Evolution couldn't suddenly press an undo button. Instead, humans did something no other animal had ever done. We started solving evolution's problems ourselves. Think about that for a second. A beaver builds a dam because instinct tells it to. A spider spins a web because instinct tells it to. A bird builds a nest because instinct tells it to. Humans do something completely different. We invent. When nature gives us a problem, we create a solution. That's one of the biggest reasons our species became so successful. Not because evolution made us perfect, because we learned how to improve ourselves. Fire was an invention. Stone tools were inventions. Spears were inventions. And eventually, clothing became another invention. But here's something strange. Scientists have never found the world's first shirt, not even close. Leather rots, plant fibers disappear, animal skins break down. Time destroys almost everything. So, how do we know humans even started wearing clothes when they did? The answer isn't hidden inside an ancient cave. It isn't buried under the ground. And it isn't locked inside a museum. It's hiding on your head. Or at least, it used to be. Lisa, tiny parasites. Probably one of the last animals you'd expect to help solve one of history's biggest mysteries. But they did. Head lice have lived with humans for an incredibly long time. They survive in hair. They don't need clothing. Then something unusual happened. A new type of lice appeared. Clothing lice. Unlike head lice, they can't survive without clothes, which creates a very interesting question. If clothing lice need clothing, when did clothing first appear? Scientists compared the DNA of both species. It was like comparing two distant cousins. The results were shocking. The two species separated around 170,000 years ago. Not exactly, but close enough to tell an incredible story. Long before anyone invented writing, long before the pyramids, long before the first farms, humans were already wrapping themselves in something. Not because they wanted to look fashionable, not because they were embarrassed, because without it, they probably wouldn't survive. And that tiny parasite accidentally became one of the greatest historians our species has ever known. But what did those first clothes actually look like? Probably not what you're imagining. Forget cotton, forget wool sweaters, forget jeans. The first clothes were almost certainly ugly. Fresh animal hides, still stiff, still heavy, sometimes still covered in fur. Imagine wrapping an entire deer's skin around your shoulders. It smells. It's uncomfortable. It slips every time you move. But after your first freezing night, you stop caring how it looks. You only care that you're still alive. For thousands of years, that was enough. Clothing wasn't fashion. It was survival. Then humans discovered something even more important. A piece of clothing doesn't have to be wrapped around your body. It can be shaped. Somewhere along the way, people began punching tiny holes through animal hides. Then they threaded strips of animal sinew through those holes. Later, they carved needles from bone. Not metal. Bone. Small, sharp, simple, but revolutionary. For the first time, clothing actually fit the body. Sleeves appeared, better shoes appeared, warm hats, gloves. Everything became more efficient, which meant humans could survive even colder places. And once that happened, there was almost nowhere left to stop us. We climbed mountains, we crossed frozen valleys, we followed animals into places no human had ever seen before. Eventually, some groups reached Siberia. At the time, the Earth looked very different. Sea levels were much lower. Between Asia and North America, a massive land bridge appeared. Today, it's underwater. Back then, you could simply walk across it. No boats, no ships, just ice, snow, and an endless stretch of land. Without warm clothing, that journey would have been almost impossible, which means something incredible. The clothes on your back may be one of the reasons humans reached the Americas. Think about that. A jacket doesn't just keep you warm. Thousands of years ago, it helped shape the map of the world. But clothing kept evolving. Eventually, people stopped making clothes only to survive. They started decorating them, adding color, adding patterns, adding jewelry. Your clothes began telling other people who you were, where you came from, what tribe you belonged to, whether you were a hunter, a leader, or a warrior. Without saying a single word, clothing became communication. Then came farming, cities, kingdoms, empires. Suddenly, clothing meant something completely different. It showed wealth, power, status. Some people wore silk, others wore rough animal skins, some wore gold, others barely had enough fabric to stay warm. The purpose of clothing had changed. It no longer just protected the body, it reflected society itself. Today, the average person owns dozens of pieces of clothing. Some people own hundreds. We choose outfits without even thinking. A blue shirt today, a black hoodie tomorrow, running shoes, winter boots, rain jackets, business suits, wedding dresses. They're so common, we rarely stop to ask why they exist. But every single piece of clothing can trace its history back to one simple problem. Humans lost their fur. At first, that sounded like evolution making a terrible mistake. But maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Losing our fur allowed us to become better endurance hunters. Better endurance hunters found more food. Finding more food allowed our ancestors to survive. Surviving led them into colder places. Colder places forced them to invent clothing. Clothing allowed them to spread across the planet. One change triggered another, then another, then another. Like falling dominoes. It's strange to think that one of the biggest reasons you're wearing a t-shirt today may have started millions of years ago, when evolution decided humans no longer needed a thick coat of fur. Sometimes, the smallest changes create the biggest consequences. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of human evolution. We didn't become the dominant species because we were the strongest or the fastest. We became the dominant species because every weakness forced us to invent something better. We lost our fur, so we invented clothes. We weren't strong enough, so we invented weapons. We couldn't fly, so we invented airplanes. Again and again, humans turned disadvantages into advantages. And that may be the real superpower of our species. The next time you put on a jacket or tie your shoes, remember, you're not just getting dressed. You're using one of the oldest survival technologies ever created, a technology that helped a nearly hairless ape walk out of Africa, survive an ice age, and eventually change the entire world.